Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is The Blade Breaker's Daughters in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 11, The Operatic Operation. The Empire was certainly interesting. It felt more imposing than the Alliance. Something about the architecture, the people, the land itself, the air felt almost intense as their band traveled along with the merchant caravan they were hired to protect. Byleth hadn't been paying much attention to the overly similar villages when they were in Leicester, but Adrestia definitely had her attention. It might have something to do with the insurrection that happened a few years ago, but she noticed there were several armed knights on patrol along the roads, especially around as they neared the major cities of the Empire. Major cities like Inver. It was the first time she had been in a capital city. The buildings were big and blocky, and some of them felt strangely ancient. The whole city had a feeling of age to it. Old, but strong. And completely filled with people. She felt overwhelmed from the moment they entered, and when she heard that her father decided she and Shay had to stick by him if they wanted to walk around, she was thankful. Granted, they couldn't really do that when he was getting drunk, such as the previous night. That wasn't the important point though. What was important was what he had mentioned when he was drunk. When she had gone to check on him, she had overheard him talking with another mercenary, where he mentioned he had been planning on traveling to Inver before, specifically to the opera with Citrai. To the Middlefranc Opera Company, the place Victor had mentioned, the one with the divine songstress. They wanted to go, but then Citrai died, so it never happened. As such, Byleth decided that not only she would disobey her father, she would go out with only Shay, so they could buy tickets for the opera as a surprise for him. Are you sure you know where to go? Shay asked as they walked the streets of the capital. Yeah, I made sure to get directions. Byleth's answer did little to ease Shay as they continued to walk, the younger sibling continuing to glance around. You okay? Yeah, just feeling kinda weird, you know? Some of the people around here are strange. How so? Well, you ever just look at someone and they just give you the chills? No. Well, can we just hurry up then? Byleth nodded and took Shay's hand, earning an annoyed noise from the purple-haired girl. You don't need to hold my hand. I do if you're nervous. Papa, Geralt did that for me, so I'm going to do it for you. Why'd you call him Geralt? I should be professional. We're family, but he's also my captain, so I need to get used to being professional when we're around important people. All right. Shay shrugged that off, though Byleth could feel her tense for some reason. The blue-haired teen gave a small glance around the crowd. There were a lot of people walking around, but the clothes in general were nicer than she was used to seeing. Lots of people wore those square hats scholars had, there were plenty of guards in full plate and even heavy armor, and most people were wearing the crimson colors of the Empire. Even the clearly poorer citizens in brown or beige clothing seemed to like adding a splash of red to their clothes in the form of sashes or belts to mark their allegiance. Then there were the strange people in black clothes and bird masks. Those did stand out. That didn't necessarily mean they were evil and the reason Shay was getting a bad feeling, but Byleth did make a mental note of them. Greetings, you lovely young ladies. Cut in a voice, breaking Byleth from her thoughts. Looking over, she saw a man who seemed somewhat older than the two of them, who was likely a noble with how well made his clothes were. Would you care to join me for some tea? We're busy. Too busy for tea? I'm sure that cannot really be true. Tell me, what are two lovely young ladies doing out on their own anyway? Running errands for your parents, perhaps. He smiled. It looked unpleasant. Perhaps I could assist you. Byleth moved in front of Shay. She was being quiet, and Byleth could tell she was still tense. I must respectfully decline, sir. It would be my lord, not sir. The man held his arms behind his back and smiled again. Now that Byleth was seeing it, she knew what Shay meant about a smile not reaching someone's eyes. And I decline your declination. Allow me to be clear, young lady. Either we finish this conversation with you accepting my offer, or I, a nobleman of the noble house Korsh, will call the guards with evidence that you have stolen from me. As you seem woefully ignorant to how things work here, I will be blunt and state they will believe me over you every time. Byleth nodded. Understood. Then in one smooth motion, she drew the dagger from her waist and drove it up through the soft part of the man's abdomen. His eyes bulged, but she pulled back and stabbed up again, harder, before pulling the knife back and wiping it on the nobleman's coat. She took Shay's hand and walked away with her in tow. She kept her ear out to see if Lord Korsh managed to say anything, but all she heard were some desperate, pained gasps before he collapsed and a nearby woman screamed. She turned towards the scream, affecting a look of curiosity at the sight of a nobleman bleeding out on the ground, and when the guards quickly came by, one was nice enough to hurry her from the scene with a mention that it was something children shouldn't see. Good work looking disturbed, Byleth complimented as she walked away with Shay. How did you do that? Don't ask too many questions while we're still in public, she cautioned, before glancing up at her taller, yet still younger sister. He was dangerous. Yeah, but, you just did that? Without hesitating at all? And how didn't we get caught? I'm still not that tall. For some reason, that admission felt annoying. He wasn't especially big, but he blocked the view of the nearest guards instead of keeping them in his line of sight. He probably knew they wouldn't approve, so his first instinct was to hide what he was doing. His words implied he knew what he was doing though, so I think this wasn't his first time trying something like this. Either way, I'm wearing dark clothes right now, so there was less of a chance of any blood spatter showing up. The second stab was risky though. I should have been more careful even if his clothes were thick enough to catch most of it. Shay blinked at her. Do you think about things like that a lot? Byleth shrugged. It was a little stiff. She wasn't used to shrugging. I listen to people. I'm not good at interacting with them, so I just listen to the mercenaries in camp sometimes. Ezra used to be a hired knife before he did official mercenary work, so I asked him to show me the best places for stabbing someone. He likes violets, so I gave him one and he was fine with the idea. You bribed one of Dad's mercs to show you how to stab people better. Yes. Why? In case something like this happened. Shay stared at her. She didn't let go, and she didn't stop walking, so things were probably fine. You're gripping my hand kind of tight, bye. Oh, sorry. She loosened her grip and glanced up at her sister. Better. Shay smiled. It reached her eyes. Much. Hey, so where's this opera place anyway? We've been walking for a while. It shouldn't be much farther. We need to buy tickets first. I don't know why we can't just pay at the door, but that's what Candace said. Do you know everyone's names? I try to. You said I'm going to lead when Geralt retires. So I'm going to be a good captain and know everyone. Sounds good to me. It might be hard to do when we get more people though. Oh, and just for the record, that's twice you've saved me now. Yeah, it is. That means you're ahead of me, and I'm going to have to catch up. Shay stated, clenching her free hand into a fist as she smiled. So you better be ready. Next time, I'm saving your life. Okay. Her smile dropped into an annoyed look. Fair. I'm not going to say you should be more excited, but I can tell when you're just humoring me. I don't know what you're talking about. You do. You totally do. You're smiling right now. So she was. Geralt sighed. I really shouldn't be encouraging this. I told you two to stick by me when you wanted to go out into the city and you completely ignored that. Yeah, but it turned out fine. Shay said, her hand in Geralt's as she and Byleth pulled him along. We got fancy opera tickets and there wasn't even any trouble. There was some trouble, Byleth admitted, her hand also in Geralt's. He gave her a glance. What kind of trouble? Trouble. I can explain more later. He sighed. Trouble you can't discuss in public then, sure. All right, I'll keep quiet for now. You two need to be careful though, this is a dangerous city. From what I've been hearing, some noble was even knifed earlier today. Yeah, that's something that did happen, yup, Shay muttered, looking nervous. Kids, please tell me you didn't knife a noble. What? We didn't knife a noble, Byleth stated, before pulling him more insistently, "Come on. We have to be there for the opera." Gerald felt like he should follow up on that, if just to make sure his kids weren't about to get arrested. "Why are you so insistent on going to the opera anyway? You didn't get to go before?" "Huh. I heard you talking yesterday, when you were drunk." No longer pulling at him to follow, Byleth looked up at Gerald. "You wanted to go with Mom, but weren't able to. Starting to think you two kids are too good for me." "Heh, the best dad deserves the best kids, no?" Shay said, smiling up at him. "Is that your way of saying you're going to behave from now on?" Let's not get ahead of ourselves now. I guess that's the best I'll get." "It will. Now come on, we gotta move. These tickets were expensive, so they have to be good seats." There were, in fact, no seats at all. While the Middlefrank Opera Company was indeed open to the public, there was a difference between the noble and commoner sections. Nobles had booths above the commoners, their own private sections where they could enjoy the play in comfort. The commoners, meanwhile, had an open area in front of the stage that they were meant to crowd around in. And since many of them had been waiting around before the opera had started, it meant the three of them were near the back. Frowning, Shay did her best to look over the shoulders of the people in front of her, barely able to glance over, while Byleth had already resigned herself to being unable to see. "All right, get on up," Gerald said, grabbing onto the two to lift them up onto his shoulders. Hey, what are you doing?" Shay asked, clearly embarrassed as she tried to steady herself. "It'd be a shame if we came all the way here and you two weren't able to see anything. This old man can at least hold you two up for the show. He might be getting older, but he was still strong enough to give his girls the best view he could give." Byleth, meanwhile, seemed pleased at being able to see the stage, especially as the performance had begun. The narrator began to speak, telling everyone about the tale of love and tragedy that was about to begin. The story of two young lovers forced to fight on opposite sides. And while Byleth couldn't follow the story completely, she couldn't help but feel sad as it went on. It was the tale of a young knight and a noblewoman, the daughter of a viscount, who first met as students at a monastery. The two became close, first friends then lovers, joined together under the same house, yet the knight lived in service to a baron who hated the lady's family. The feud had lasted long, but only came to true blows after one insult too many saw the baron's son dead and the viscount blamed. The baron, who treated the knight as a son, was wounded by the viscount in the battle that followed, and the knight, in an attempt to defend his lord, killed the viscount then and there. Stained with the blood of his lover's father, then young man was hailed as a hero and adopted into the baron's family, yet the noble lady, now a viscountess, burned with hatred for she knew not the name of the man who murdered her father, merely that he was a knight adopted by her family's most hated foe. Banners were called in vengeance and the lady took the field. This time, the baron was slain and his castle sieged as the vengeful viscountess called for the head of her father's murderer. The knight, now a new baron, decided the only way to soothe the flames of her hate was to face her in such a duel. Armored fully, his identity hidden, he declared he would fight, if only she would spare those of his household. But no, she spat, she would never rest until she saw all of the baron's blood dead and buried. And thus, the duel was fought, and the knight did die. Only when he was struck down did the viscountess remove his helm, intent on seeing the face of her father's murderer and only finding the visage of the man she loved instead. The final song was her elegy for the lives lost in hatred, and a promise that never would she seek the end of the baron's line, for though hate burned hot, vengeance was cold and empty. And the curtains came to a close as the fire illuminating the stage was slowly put out. Silence fell upon the opera house, before it was suddenly broken by thunderous applause from the audience. The lights came back on as the curtains rose, the actors lining up to bow together as flowers began to get thrown at the stage. The actress playing the heroine in specific got a lot of attention, apparently someone called Dorothea, the mystical songstress, based on what everyone around them was saying. Despite how far they were from the stage, Byleth couldn't help but notice that, without the veil covering her face, she looked much younger than Byleth had assumed, as if she wasn't much older than her. Though before she could look for much longer, she felt her father set her down, the older mercenary letting out a grunt as he rubbed his shoulders. "Didn't expect for the play to be that long," Gerald said as they were let out. "Did you girls enjoy that?" Yeah, it was nice, I guess. Shay replied, I didn't really understand what was happening, but the singing was nice. Oh, and so was the sword play. It was very nice, but sad, Byleth said as they headed out of the opera house. The lead actress was pretty. Huh? Geralt and Shay both asked, completely stopping in their tracks. Glancing back, Byleth tilted her head in confusion. Is something wrong? No, it's just. You think she's pretty? Shay asked, an odd grin creeping up her face. Yeah? She's pretty. She has a nice voice too. Shay's smile was far too wide. Geralt, meanwhile, let out a sigh. Right, never thought this day would actually come. You two are acting weird, Byleth noted, before turning to head back to the camp. Hey, so what else do you like about the singer girl? Shay asked as she walked next to her sister, keeping pace, and still smiling at her. She has nice hair. What else? Why are you asking? Because you like her. You think she's pretty. Oh. Yeah, I guess. I don't know her though. Yeah, but that's how it starts in all the books. You see a pretty girl from afar, your heart starts beating fast and your face gets red and then. Alright Shay, don't pester your sister, Geralt said, putting a hand on her shoulder and steering her away from Byleth. Ah. But this is big. Byleth never said anyone was pretty before, this is definitely important. She peeked around her dad, looking at her bemused sister. Hey bye, you should get her a flower. Oh, what kind of flowers do you think she'd like? I don't understand what's going on right now. We can talk back at camp, Geralt said, in fact, you two still need to tell me what trouble you had to deal with. And Shay's smile immediately dropped. Maybe we should keep talking about. She tried to pull away and Geralt's grip tightened. Not too hard, but enough to keep her moving along with him instead of scurrying off. Come on Byleth. We can talk about your interest in girls afterwards. Oh, okay. That seemed strange to talk about, but alright. Were girls even that interesting? Byleth considered the question as she headed back to camp with her family, and found her thoughts drifting back to that girl on stage. She was kind of interesting, now that she considered it. Something to think about later. Chapter 12, So your daughter murdered a noble. So Geralt's kids had murdered a noble in broad daylight. More specifically, a creepy, predatory noble had accosted his girls in the middle of the city, a thought that nearly caused Geralt's hand to crush the mug he was holding in his grip as he recalled Byleth's description of events, and his quiet, thoughtful, unemotional kid had driven a knife into the creep's stomach. Twice, for good measure. Now, Geralt was not a man opposed to killing. He would be the largest hypocrite in the entire world if he said he was. He was, however, well aware that certain people were considered less okay to murder than others. Bandits and outlaws might have been anyone before they decided to take up theft as their career path, but that choice of theirs meant they were fair game to any merc looking to make some coin off of their bounty. Nobles, on the other hand, they weren't off limits, not on the battlefield where anyone could die from a stray arrow or bolt, but Victor wasn't wrong when he said nobles got upset at their own dying. And one of their own dying in the middle of their capital city, where they should be safe. He let out a slow sigh, then glanced to the side as a scruffy, brown-haired man in leathers and a cloak sat beside him. Well, no one's pointing to your girls as possible suspects, at least around the low-down types, Ezra said, raising a hand to call the bartender over. I made a few suggestions that this Korsh guy ran afoul of someone with means to act on a grudge, in case it helps. Apparently he was a shifty type to begin with, the brother of some count's vassal doing the usual brown-nosing courtier stuff. Did he work in one of the ministries? I think so, but as a paper pusher at best. Might need to wait until Vic gets here to be sure, but Littleby didn't pick the worst way of doing things. A noble gets stabbed in broad daylight and it's not obvious who did it, people assume an assassin, not a kid. Right. Don't I have you to thank for her knowing how to do that? Ezra shrugged as he received his mug of mead. Well, if you want to actually thank me, I won't say no, Captain. Geralt just sighed, massaging the bridge of his nose. Thank you for teaching Byleth how to gut a potential threat and get away with it. You're still in deep shit for things turning out like this. I can accept that. Worse comes to worse, blame it on me. I'm not doing that. One man can get away a lot easier than a whole band, Captain. Left unsaid was how unlikely it was that man could survive on his own, hunted by the Imperials. And I said that's not going to happen. You're not going to the noose for helping. I might break your jaw later though. Just a warning. Thank you for the forewarning, Captain. And hey, at least I'd get to spend more time with Gertie if you do. Geralt raised an eyebrow. Really? You and her? Maybe? We're seeing how it goes. Oh, hey, there's Vic. Geralt turned his gaze towards the second of his mercs he'd sent out. The bald, bearded man looked surprisingly weary, and didn't greet him as he sat down and ordered an ale. Geralt waited for him to down the drink before he spoke up, despite the sudden tension he felt in his shoulders. Bad news. Terrible news, not about the girls though, that turned out better than I thought. Geralt felt some tension ease, though he still frowned. You mind explaining? Right, I asked some of the guards. Subtly, of course. Ezra snorted and Victor shot him a look. Gonna ignore that. Anyway, I asked, from one former corrupt guard to some currently corrupt guards, what the story was with the stabbed noble. We're mercs, we get interested if there's coin to be made on vengeance missions. Now, half the guys I asked had no idea what I was asking about, and the other half barely gave a damn. Yeah, there was some talk of a minor noble being stabbed, but only 4 guys even knew his name, and when I asked for details, an account of me being a curious guy who likes to know the gory stuff, one guy tells me he's sure it's some gang with this weird scorpion mark, another thinks it's some inter-ministry business, and the third's blaming it on a jealous lover. As for Mr. 4, he tells me a bit about what he saw and even mentions pushing 2 kids away from the scene, but he's convinced it was done by someone from Brigid. Geralt blinked. The island. Yeah. Well, I think it's an archipelago when it's a bunch of islands, but yeah. Only one guy remembers there being kids anywhere nearby, and he didn't even consider they could have done it. Now we could still kill him if we have to. We're not doing that. Yeah, that's a shit idea, Ezra said. They've already got explanations for why this noble died. We kill a guard and suddenly it looks like a cover-up and people will start looking. Ah, damn, that's true. Okay, so the girls might be in the clear, Geralt noted, relaxing a little. He did give Victor another curious look though. What's the terrible news you were talking about? Oh, that. Right, so, you know how the insurrection happened a few years back? And Duke Aegir's been holding the reins ever since. Right. Well, just a few days ago, the new Imperial heir was announced. Geralt blinked. The new heir? They needed a new one. Yeah, see, the Imperial family has been under house arrest since the insurrection, right? The Emperor and his kids were all under the dutiful protection of the Prime Minister while things were settled. And that stupid bastard somehow let them all die. What? Victor sighed, nursing his drink. They're saying a plague hit the palace. Somehow, some way, the heirs caught it and started dropping like flies. Like that shit in Faerghus. We're talking about 11 princes and princesses, all completely healthy before this, and all except one of them dies. The new crown princess, Edelgard von Hresvelg. Goddess, Ezra cursed, his brow furrowed, all but one of them? How does that even, saints, that's insane. You're telling me. I can't say I have a lot of love for the Emperor for what he did to Hrym, but saints, and stars, his kids didn't deserve that. Not that it's stopping some pricks from saying the goddess sent the plague as divine punishment. Ezra leaned back in visible disgust while Geralt let out a sigh. He tried not to think of his own kids. Aegir didn't have anything to do with it, did he? Victor scoffed. Don't get me wrong, Captain. I hate the guy as much as anyone, but he'd be deranged to let the Imperial heirs die. He's got his own boy and all the rest of the ministers have heirs and spares. The smart thing to do would have been to divvy them up, guarantee a royal marriage to anyone going along with his plans and tie their families to the Hresvelgs tight enough that the Imperials would never get loose. Letting them die, or, Goddess forbid, killing them himself would have been shooting an arrow straight in his own foot. This is as bad for him as it is for anyone else. Well, it's not like we could do much even if he was involved. Amen. Bastards should at least have the courtesy to resign in disgrace though. Hell, I'm surprised I haven't heard about Marquis Vestra killing himself. Then again, the rat did turn on the Emperor to begin with, so I doubt he will. Does the Marquis usually kill themselves if something happens to the royal family? Ezra asked. Imperial family, and there's a pretty famous story about it, actually. One Prince of Vestra was sworn to die in battle and the Marquis burned himself alive in penance. After killing and flaying the men responsible, of course. Adrestians are insane. Hey, Faergons ain't much better. Don't start this again, Geralt warned the two. Victor grunted. Fine. Still, we should probably move on, Captain. Aside from it just being a good idea in general to not be near the scene of the crime, we're probably not gonna see a lot of work around here. All the nobles will be focused on getting favor with the new crown princess, and we can't help with that. Yeah, I suppose, do you know how she is? Heh. Being a dad does soften you up some, huh? Geralt just gave him a flat stare. You know, I can actually see the resemblance between you and Byleth when you do that. Anyway, the poor girl's apparently still sickly. Her hair's all white and the Duke ain't letting her out of his sight. Or at least not the palace. Probably doesn't want his last shot to pass away. Geralt felt like sighing, but, at the end of the day, there just wasn't anything he could do. The princess might have it rough, but she wasn't his problem. All right. Come on, let's get going. Ezra, you're paying. Wait, what? Consider it a way to make things up to me. He pushed himself up from the bar and headed out to leave, ignoring the way Victor stuck his tongue out at Ezra. Somehow, his kids were the least childish people he had to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Still, even if his men didn't think there was a problem, a part of him still felt some concern that the death of a noble would suddenly catch attention, even interest. That someone would see this sudden death and decide it needed justice. And it was a truly terrifying thing to think of justice being aimed at his kids. Fortunately for Geralt and his nerves though, the news of Lord Korsha's death was completely covered in the following week by something far more important. Dada and Brigid had just formed an alliance, and invaded Adrestia. Chapter 13, Time for War. Shay had never actually experienced a war. She'd been in fights, sure, and she'd seen skirmishes, but wars were different. Wars were bigger. Wars meant, even if you weren't involved, you would get dragged into it. After what had happened in the capital, Geralt had decided to play it safe and lay low for a bit. Which meant when the war began, they weren't near any of the major cities, and as such did not know it had started. Until one day, when they were packing up camp, a group of Brigid soldiers, a scouting party as Geralt would later describe them, stumbled upon their camp. The next few moments descended into utter chaos as Dalton, the closest person to them, noticed some were injured and approached to ask if they needed help. His goodwill was met with a sword to the chest. Shay couldn't tell exactly what happened after that, other than a lot of blood was shed. Even Shay and Byleth were unable to stay out of it, as the duo found themselves crossing swords with a soldier, who seemed surprised that two young girls were able to keep up with them. Byleth lunged in, deflecting the tanned man's sword and attempting to stab straight through him, but he was surprisingly quick and moved back before the blade could land. Shay watched for a moment as her sister fought the foreign soldier, who moved with a nimble quickness she hadn't seen before, when she noticed another man of Brigid pin Ezra to the ground and raise a knife. She was moving before she knew it, swinging her blade down at the Brigid man's head, but he moved quickly, just like his friend, and lunged for her, stabbing forward rapidly with the sword in his other hand. Shay felt herself falling back, trying to keep steady under a flurry of blows as Ezra yelled something. She thought she saw him trying to get up, but his leg was bleeding, and Shay was on her own. She wasn't scared, she was sure she could handle it, but each blow jarred her arms and she was getting pushed back more and more as the man sported a jaunty smile. "I am respecting your skill, girl. I will give you a death that is quick." And suddenly his other hand came around, the knife stabbing straight for her eye, and when she raised her sword to block it, his sword hit something. Shay blinked, then coughed. She couldn't, something happened to the air in her lungs and she couldn't. SHH. Spirits shall take you now. Lay you to rest, the man said, before pulling back his sword, dripping with blood, and swinging it straight for her head. Not yet. You're not dying yet. His sword never reached her head. He stumbled back, blown by a sudden force as Shay felt strong, stronger than she'd ever felt before. The man said something she didn't recognize, and it felt warm all around her. There was something glowing by her head and another sword in her hand, and she moved without thinking, a scream erupting from her mouth as she cleaved the man in half. And then she passed out. Shay blinked awake some time later, in the infirmary tent, from what she could tell. She'd been in there enough times to recognize it. Her shirt was off and she could feel bandages around her chest, which was weird because she felt fine. Maybe still a little sleepy? There was a strange feeling for a moment there, as though something tried to well up, before it suddenly receded, leaving her more confused than anything. She sat up, then paused when she noticed Byleth was by her bed, her eyes closed as she rested on a chair. The blue-haired girl was holding a sheathed sword in her arms, for some reason, and as Shay leaned over to poke her face, her eyes immediately opened. Oh, good, you're awake. Shay leaned back as Byleth suddenly thrust a canteen in her face. Drink. Now that she was thinking about it, she was really thirsty, so after downing as much water as she could in one go, then going back for some more, Shay finally felt that her mouth and throat were no longer dry and she could speak just fine. So what happened? Did we win? I don't think the camp would still be standing if we lost. Oh, yeah, that is kind of a stupid question. Where's Dad? Talking with the Varley man. The who now? A knight from some nearby noble, Count Varley. Papa, Geralt's talking with him about work. Shay pouted. You don't have to be professional when it's just us two. It's a good habit to get into. Dalton's dead. Oh. Oh, huh. Shay settled back. That's, huh. Now that she was looking, she did notice there were more beds filled than usual in the tent, and she could see Gertrude talking with some healer guy she didn't recognize. Yeah. I think they're called Brigittians, started the fight by slashing him. By the time anyone got to him, he was already dead. Oh. That sucks. He was nice. Yeah. And that was all there was to say. The Varley soldiers said that there's a war going on. Dada and Bridget joined forces to invade Adrestia. Wow, who are Dada and Bridget? Some foreign countries. Bridget is an archipelago, according to Victor. I don't know much about Dada, just that it's farther away and bigger. Can't say you're wrong there, kid, or that I know much more than you, Geralt said as he walked over to them and took a seat by Byleth. Shay immediately brightened. Hi Dad. Hey kiddo. How are you feeling? Great. I'm not sure why I'm even bandaged, I feel really good. Because you were stabbed, Gertrude called out, before turning back to her conversation. Yeah, what she said. Geralt sighed. I'm glad you're okay, Shay. You were out of it for some time. Well, like I said, I'm totally fine now. Well, if you say so. We can talk about it more later. Just try to get some rest, okay? The night out there isn't giving us a lot of time to get ready. For what? Byleth asked, a bit curious. We've been hired to help defend Varley territory, Geralt said, glancing over to see the new healer leaving the tent. From the sounds of it, they aren't giving us much of a choice. As Victor puts it, Varley is a coward, and is very willing to throw anyone under the carriage if it benefits him. As such, if we don't agree, we'll likely end up being called bandits and get attacked, Gertrude piped up, deciding to sit down too as she got a bit of rest. Though it's better to defend a coward than get sent to the front lines, I suppose. That's one positive, though I'd prefer to just leave the Empire entirely and head back to Alliance territory to avoid this whole mess. If only it were that simple. And for some reason, I'm also getting the feeling this job won't pay much. Can't we just leave? I mean, they can't force you to stay, right Captain? Shay asked. There's too many injured for us to leave fast enough. Even if we can get away, we'd end up losing too many people in the process. Will we have to fight more of those Brigidians? Byleth asked. Hopefully we won't, but we'll see. Getting up, Geralt began to leave the tent before addressing Byleth. Make sure she doesn't try to get up before we leave. Okay. Well, today has been a mess, Gertrude said, getting up as well. I need to smoke. Call me if anyone wakes up. And after she left, Shay felt Byleth hold her hand, gripping tightly. This time, she didn't complain. How are you doing, Bye? Better. Sorry I worried you. They started calling us things. Huh. The Brigid people, they started calling us something. Candace said they were saying something about demons. Wait, really? Did we get nicknames? Shay asked, almost excited until she saw the look in her sister's eyes. I don't like being called a demon. Shay paused and reconsidered, saying she thought it sounded cool. Well, I'm fine with it, so I'll be the Violet Demon and you can be, what's a good name? You're too silly to be a demon. Hey. I can definitely be a demon. She paused. Wait, why am I a demon anyway? You started glowing and cut a man in half. Shay blinked. I did? Huh. That's weird. Yep. Wait, did you start glowing too? No. I just, sort of, killed every Brigidian between me and you when I saw you collapse. She glanced away, maybe a little sheepish. I think it was maybe 6 of them. Does that count as you saving me again? Shay, don't get competitive over this. I'm just asking. She did, however, make a mental note that she was going to beat Byleth's record in whatever their next battle might be. Chapter 14, War is dull. War was surprisingly boring. Maybe it was just where they were situated, but Shay had to admit to being bored more often than not. The Varley County was far up in the north of the Empire, closer to the Alliance than the sea, so the forces of Brigid and Dada didn't make it up there as often as she expected from that first encounter. They did still have to fight some groups, but they were mostly small scouting parties and Geralt and Byleth were usually the ones going after them while Shay stayed back on guard duty. She didn't think that was entirely fair, especially since it meant she couldn't try catching up to Byleth, but By was 15 now and that meant Dad was more willing to take her along than Shay, who still insisted she probably was as old, if not older, than her sister. Though she hadn't won a spar against Byleth in a while, well, either way, the downtime meant she had more time to practice her two-sword style at least, which she was getting really good at. Something about it felt really natural to her, like it was just easier using 2 blades than 1. She could still use 1 just fine, but something about 2 felt better. Ezra said something about her being ambidextrous, so maybe that had to do with it. Either way, she did still see some combat over the months, especially since they moved around. They were under contract with Varley, but that didn't mean they couldn't go fight in other territories that needed help. Apparently the Count even encouraged it, since it made him look good to lend his strength. The Brigidians she already knew a bit about from that first fight, so facing off against the quick-moving islanders who tended to hold their blades in reverse grips and wore light clothing was something she got used to pretty quickly. The Dodans were definitely rarer to fight and she usually had to hang back against them because they tended to be heavily armored and wielded weird spears called tridents. There were also apparently some skilled archers on their side, but she never went up against them. And thanks to Byleth stepping up more, there hadn't been any more losses on their side. People still got injured, but her sister proved to be quite the tactical genius. To the point that some of the mercs were already treating her like a second in command. That being said, it seemed like the war was rough on other fronts, with an entire noble house seemingly being wiped out. Not that people seemed to mind, with some saying they deserved it for siding with the Emperor during the insurrection. But, it seemed the Empire was going to be launching a counter-attack, with a different Count apparently leading the charge. Shay didn't know Counts could lead an army, but she wished they could work for him instead of Varley. Speaking of, it seemed that thanks to both Geralt and Byleth, they were being invited to be congratulated by the Count himself. Geralt wanted to go by himself, but Varley had apparently asked for the demons to come with him. Which, on the one hand, she was getting recognition for her deeds, which was nice. On the other hand, she had been trying her best to get people to stop calling Byleth a demon, so she was disappointed to hear the moniker stick. Regardless, Shay found herself being led into the Varley estate, standing behind Geralt as she did her best to be professional. Everyone was wearing some fancier clothes than usual because apparently that was a thing nobles wanted. Presenting his lordship, Count Gregoire von Varley, announced a knight, standing at attention as they looked up at the landing above them. Moments later, a purple-haired man looked down upon them, eyeing them all with mild interest and contempt. "You must be Geralt the Blade Breaker then." "Yes, your lordship, you honor us with your presence," Geralt said, with a practiced tone as he bowed towards the count. Byleth followed suit and Shay did so as well, though she lagged behind. And those must be the demons I've heard so much about. Are they truly your daughters?" "Yes, your lordship." "It seems you've trained them well. My daughter could learn a thing or two for them." Shay suddenly found herself imagining a female version of the count glaring down at them and tried not to grimace. It would probably look bad. "You'll forgive me if she does not join us. She has a weak constitution, and I can't begin to imagine how dealing with people of your persuasion may affect her frail heart." That sounded like an insult. Shay wasn't sure how, but it did. And now she was wondering how long she was supposed to keep her head bowed. "I understand completely, your lordship." "I doubt you do. Nevertheless, you have served my land well in your time here by handling that rabble that somehow made it this far. It's madness to think Oaks and Novelli failed so miserably as to allow forces all the way to my territory. You have my gratitude. Now do be off, I have others to honor today and I really must move right along." Geralt straightened. "Pardon me, your lordship, but there is the matter of our pay for aiding you in this trying time." Varley sneered. "You've been paid already." "No, we haven't." Geralt's immediate contradiction earned a scowl from Varley. "Ridiculous. Are you trying to say I am not a man who pays his debts? You're just trying to extort me, and I will not have it. Guards, remove this rabble at once." The guards moved, then everyone froze at the sound of Geralt cracking his neck. The Blade Breaker leaned his neck to the other side, letting it pop again, then rubbed a hand to it. "Sorry about that. I was getting stiff keeping my head bowed. Kids, let's get going. We shouldn't trouble the Count with our presence anymore." "See that you do," Count Varley said, trying to get the last word in as Geralt turned and left, with Byleth following him immediately and Shay trailing after with a frown on her face. "Hey, Dad, why didn't you? It's not worth it to deal with a man like that. We have to pick our battles, Shay." "But this means we're not getting paid at all?" "Not by him, no. It's why I've been charging the towns we've been helping. I never mentioned we had a contract with the Count to anyone, so as far as the people in his territory are concerned, we're just heroes that helped out. For a decent rate, of course." "Oh. But we can't do anything about the Count. Not everyone is going to be Gloucester, Shay. We can't expect decent pay from every noble, but we can spread word around that Varley's bad to work for." "So where next?" Byleth asked, completely unfazed by everything that happened. "Next, we'll probably head west. We're getting out of Varley County, and it might be best to wait for Burgleys to handle the main part of the fighting. Things must be a real mess in the west if the enemy managed to get past the mountains, that or they came up from the southern coast, but I think there's another Count in the way down there." Shay glanced at her dad as he started muttering under his breath, then spared another look back at the Varley castle. She was tempted to make some kind of rude gesture, but it would probably be a bad idea. Especially since she was pretty sure she spotted someone spying on them from a window. The Dada and Brigid War, as people were calling it, wrapped up pretty neatly all things considered. The King of Brigid, Don Acha Macnieri, was killed in battle by the War Minister of Adrestia, Count Leopold von Burgleys, and that essentially ended everything. Shay wasn't sure if she'd ever need to know the details of stuff like that, but it did mean the war was over. More importantly, it was Byleth's birthday again, and Shay sprung for something nice. The Beginnings of Sorcery, Volume 2, Byleth read from the cover of the Yellow Book. Like the first volume, it had little decorative bits at the edges of it, but this time they were lightning bolts instead of flames. Huh. Thank you. You're welcome. That one's supposed to be all about faith and light magic, like the stuff Gertrude uses. Behind them, Gerald couldn't quite hide a wince, but thankfully Shay was distracted talking up how impressive her gift was, and Byleth was distracted by Shay. He knew, at some point, Byleth was probably going to interact with the faith of the goddess, but he was probably being paranoid to even consider it a bad thing, right? Meanwhile, Shay remained completely ignorant of her father's concerns and much more interested in prodding Byleth to start trying out spells from the book. Can we? Byleth asked, glancing up at her father. I suppose it should be fine. We're not exactly in a great place for it though. That much was true. They didn't have a full camp set up for the night because they were currently passing through the Okama Mountains. Specifically the part that separated the eastern half of the empire from the west, which was far enough south from the monastery that Geralt actually felt comfortable going there. We can set up a couple dummies near the edge of a cliff and let Bai give it a go, Ezra suggested, uncaring of the annoyed look Geralt gave him. Yes. Come on Dad, please. Shay pleaded. Geralt would have stood firm, but then Byleth looked at him too and he caught a hint of longing in her eyes, so a few minutes later, Victor and Ezra finished setting up a pair of training dummies near a cliff's edge, far enough away from the camp that there wouldn't be any more accidents, and aimed out into the distance so Byleth couldn't possibly bring the mountain down on them. It might have been paranoid, but Geralt felt his concerns were reasonable enough. Okay. Ready. Just reading. This book is interesting. There's a lot more about drawing the power from within you instead of... Yeah, that sounds really interesting, but I want to see what you can do. Byleth gave her sister an annoyed look, then decided to just flip ahead to the more combative spells. She wanted to show off, which was a weird feeling. But she knew what Shay would enjoy seeing, so she picked out a spell that looked powerful. She let out a slow breath and raised her hand, taking care to aim towards the dummy, and focused. If she'd been thinking a bit more, she would have considered using Shay's tome for a focus, but as it was, she just let the magic gather. Which was more magic than she would have expected. A lot more magic, suddenly surging up as though it was waiting for her, and she felt as though she couldn't stop herself as she intoned the word, Seraphim. A brilliant, gleaming sigil formed in front of her hand before a blast of golden light launched from her palm. The orbit formed soared forward as though on wings of light, ripped straight through the dummy they had set up, and went flying off towards a distant mountain. The Eisner family and their gathered mercenaries watched the ball of light shrink as it disappeared into the distance, before a dim flash in the distance heralded its impact into the side of the mountain. That was amazing. How did you do that? Byleth had a second to turn before Shay tackle-hugged her, and she felt a smile come to her face as her excited sister showered her with praise for her feat. Geralt, meanwhile, turned to Victor. No one lives around there, right? No one should. There's some villages, but they'd be on the other side of the mountains, nowhere near the impact. It might not be that bad, Ezra said, before noticing part of the mountain appear to start crumbling in a landslide. We should move camp. I'm fine with that. Shay couldn't stop smiling as she settled in that night. Sure, Geralt did decide to move the camp for some reason and they had to march a bit, but after that, she and Byleth were allowed to keep on practicing with Bai's new magic book. Just no big spells, unfortunately, since they already broke one dummy and their dad had a rule about how magic practice ended whenever a dummy was broken beyond use. She settled into her blankets, which felt nice and cozy in the cool mountain air. Good night, Bai. Good night Shay, her sister replied, settling into her own cot beside Shay's. Good night Dad. Shay called out, then giggled when she heard Geralt snore in reply. She really did have it good. She didn't think she'd have a family again, not after Mom, but she really was just happy. A part of her did still want to beat Byleth though. Maybe she should try learning more dark magic? Then she could be the Violet Demon and Byleth would be the Ashen, Light, thing, Dragon? Dragon might work, she did use fire too. Shay yawned, then let herself drift off. It was important to be well rested, especially if she wanted to win against Byleth again. Perhaps I could help with that, offered the strange white person in a void of floating. What? Chapter 15, A Voice in Her Head. Did you not request help? Was about as far as the white person got before Shay tried to punch them in the face, only to end up going through their head. My, how rude. Hey, who the heck are you? Shay asked after catching herself, keeping her guard up as she faced the strange being covered in weirdly familiar markings. Not even an apology, Well, if you wish to call me something, you can call me Arvel, Arvel said, then they continued, I am the one who saved your life some time ago. Huh? You saved me? When did that happen? Do you truly not remember? Arvel asked, a bit surprised. It was during the fight where you were stabbed. I gave you my power so you would not die. Wait, are you talking about the glowy thing? I would not put it in such simple words, but yes. Were it not for me you likely would have perished that day. Oh, thank you. Oh my, so this is what it feels like for someone to show gratitude, it is quite pleasant. Arvel said, looking very pleased. So, I'm not trying to be rude, but what exactly is going on? I'm pretty sure I didn't fall asleep in a void earlier. Well, that is quite simple. We are currently in your mind, Arvel explained, making Shay blink as she looked around. Some rude people said she was empty-headed, but she didn't think that was literal. And I have called you here so we can speak. To be specific, I have been trying to call you for some time, but it was quite difficult setting up this connection. Huh. So, not that I'm not grateful or anything, but why exactly did you save me? That is because you are a crucial piece to the world's cyclical nature. The world's what now? Shay asked, making Arvel sigh. To put it simply, this is your destiny. And that got Shay's attention. Wait, so I am destined to do something? What is it? That. I am not certain. All I know is that it is your destiny and I am here to help you with it. But one thing is for certain, that desire to grow stronger than your sister is what helped call me to you, and what I believe will help you fulfill your destiny. Really? So you mean Byleth really is my destined rival? Shay asked, feeling very excited. I believe so, while I do not know what exactly your destiny is, I can feel it deep within myself that defeating her is key for that. Oh, okay. So I just need to beat her in another spar. No, not quite. I don't believe that is my meaning. Well, I'm not going to fight her for real, I don't want to hurt her. You do wish to surpass her though, correct? Oh sure, then I get to be the older sister again. Arvel stared at her for a few seconds, then sighed deeply as they placed a hand against their head. I do not know where to even begin with that assertion. Fine, whatever your reasoning, your goal is clear. Surpass your sister and prove yourself better. Yeah, okay. You're not really saying anything I didn't already know though. Arvel just stared at her again. Perhaps I should have waited for you to be older. Hey, I'm 14, that's more than old enough to beat Byleth. Shay declared, then paused. Ah, wait, no, that would make Byleth older than me since she's 16 now. She would already be older than you by the basis of being a year older. Hey, quiet. I can only be the older sister if I don't acknowledge stuff like that. So you are aware of your denial of reality then, never mind. Just know that I will always be at your side, my partner in destiny. And then Shay woke up. That was a weird dream, she said, sitting up in bed and glancing over at Byleth. Ha. Woke up earlier than her again. Is everything a competition to you? Arvel asked, before raising a hand. Peace, partner. Please do not scream out of nowhere and awaken the entire camp. You're real. Of course I am real. What in the world made you think any of that was not real? I don't know, dreams are weird. One time I dreamt I was a fox. I think Byleth was a wolf. And Dad was. Would you focus, please? Arvel sighed. Of all the people in this wide world, how is it I came to be partnered with an unfocused child? Hey. I'm not. MRH? Shay. Byleth blinked awake, before sitting up, tiredness turning to alertness as she looked at her sister. What's going on? Is there trouble? Oh, no, I just... Ahem. Shay paused as Arvel cleared their throat. Partner, far be it for me to tell you what to do, but perhaps do not mention my existence to the sister you seek to defeat. You need every advantage you can get, after all. Yeah, but that's stupid. Of course I'm telling Bai about you, Shay replied, before turning back to Byleth. I'm talking to this weird white person I saw in my dreams. Their name's Arvel. Byleth blinked. Huh, Shay, are you being haunted by a ghost? Am I? Shay glanced at Arvel, who had their face in their hands. I might be. We should tell Dad then. Okay. I picked the wrong time to contact her, Arvel muttered to themselves as they watched their partner in destiny hop up from her cot and start shaking her dad awake. To be fair to themselves though, they really did not consider their partner would be this stupid. So you had a strange dream, and now the kid from that dream is hanging around? Geralt asked over breakfast, currently portioning out some of the stew for his kids. Shay answered while in the middle of eating. All right then. And is he saying anything weird? I don't think they're a he. They're like, kinda not a boy or a girl. Shay shrugged, before helping herself to another spoonful of broth. Oh, and Arvel just says it's my destiny to beat Byleth. Ah. So they're saying it's your destiny, huh? Yup. So you better watch out, Bai. Because I'm gonna beat you next time we spar, she declared, pointing her spoon at her sister beside her. You can try, Byleth replied, before simply grabbing her bowl and downing the remains of her soup. More please. Kmin kid, you've gotta leave some for the rest of the camp, Geralt chided, before turning back to the pot. Byleth pouted, before jerking slightly when Shay poked her cheek. Hey, what kind of dreams do you have? Any weird ones? I guess. I usually dream of wars and stuff. Oh, any cool wars? I cannot believe any of this, Arvel, meanwhile, muttered from nearby where they were watching the family at breakfast. He did not even ask any real questions. Well, I suppose that is to our benefit, but honestly, should he not show at least some concern for his daughter supposedly hallucinating? Geralt, meanwhile, was internally panicking. Not too much, he was used to taking care of a kid most would consider unusual, but he also thought that his adoptive daughter wouldn't have sudden issues like hearing voices and seeing what sounded like ghosts. Or, well, one ghost of ambiguous gender. How did that even work? She dreamt of a ghost and now she's seeing it? Should he be worried? Was this just another weird Shay thing? The girl had funny ideas about destiny, so maybe she just made up an imaginary friend. But, wait, did 14-year-olds have imaginary friends? He was 300 years old, he had no idea what being 14 was like. Much less a 14-year-old girl. Should he get Gertrude? This wasn't a health thing, was it? Though, no, telling Gertrude was premature. It might be something strange but benign like Byleth's heart, goddess, maybe it was something like that. Shay started glowing back in that first ambush with the Brigid folk, maybe she had some kind of magical bloodline? Did that make sense? It didn't seem like crests or, was Shay a baby dragon? Dad? I think the soup's boiling, Shay pointed out and Geralt cursed under his breath. Yeah, looks like, I'll just move it. Okay. Make sure to use your gloves, she warned just half a second too late as Geralt gripped the pot's handles with his bare hands. Geralt was a strong, seasoned warrior. He knew how to handle pain. That was why he carefully set the pot down without spilling a drop. Hey, Dad? Are you okay? Just fine. Give me 1 second. I need to check the perimeter. Geralt moved towards the edge of camp, his reddened hands splayed because trying to clench them was pure agony. Shay, Byleth, and Arvel all craned their heads to watch him leave, before the sisters settled back while the ghost raised an eyebrow at his departure. Strange. Why would he be walking off into the woods? The scream of pain and deluge of curses that echoed out a second later answered that query quite succinctly. Suffice to say, the family did wind up visiting Gertrude in short order, though not for Shay. Geralt might have had a tumultuous relationship with the Archbishop, but he was perfectly happy to praise the goddess for healing magic. By the time his group had made it out of the mountains and to the next village, it was like his hands had never been scalded at all. He made a mental note to give Gertrude a bonus next time he divvied out the pay. First and foremost though, was getting supplies at the village. While the village was a bit too close to Garreg Mach for his own preference, it was a rather bustling place, which meant they could get what they needed easily. "You must be the leader of this band of men," the village headman said as Geralt checked the supplies they had purchased. Did you need something?" Geralt asked as he turned to look at the man. "We were planning on leaving tomorrow, but if you have a job for us, I'd be happy to hear you out." That won't be necessary. I just wanted to make sure you were all okay. There was a rock slide that happened not so long ago, so I was wondering if you faced any troubles on your journey." At the mention of the rock slide, Geralt did his best to remain even-faced. "So that's what that sound was. I had thought it was a giant wolf raising a fuss." "Thankfully no, but even so, to think such a tragic accident would happen near here." Geralt almost didn't want to ask. "What accident?" "The rockslide I mentioned. Lord Arundel perished in it." The headman let out a sorrowful sigh. "To think such an honorable man would lose his life like this, may the goddess protect his spirit." Geralt, to his credit, was able to keep calm on the outside. On the inside however, he couldn't help but feel immense dread at that news. Had his daughter accidentally assassinated the Empire's regent? But if you don't mind me asking, where are you headed?" "To the kingdom," Geralt said without hesitation. "The recent war is making mercs crawl out of the woodwork, so it's hard to find work." Well, that was believable for a lie he made on the spot. Well, we do have some furs to sell if you want. The kingdom can be quite cold, so I'd recommend you bundle up. We'll take what you have. Haven't been to the kingdom since I was young, so it's probably going to take some getting used to again." As they exchanged pleasantries, Geralt spotted Victor nearby, so he excused himself to talk to the merc. "Change of plans, we're headed to the kingdom." "Eh? What the hell, why are we headed over there?" Victor asked, very clearly not pleased with having to head towards Faerghus. The only response he got in return was Geralt muttering, "It happened again," as he brushed past him. Check the description for the links to the author.